any form of knowledge if we do not agree and establish that we exist. Because if we don't believe that we exist, then none of this would make any sense. So the first truth that we have to acknowledge is the fact that we exist. These are bedrocks for establishing our worldview and beliefs and understanding of life. Number one, we exist. Number two, we are mortal, meaning we know for certain that we do not exist in this life for eternity. There is an end. There's an expiration date. How do we know this? We know it because of observation. We see that people come, they exist for a while, then they leave. And we know that there is no possible way that a person can be eternal in this realm of the existence, in this life. Based on these two important and undisputed truths, three questions arise. Question number one, what is the origin of this existence? Question number two, is there a purpose for our existence? And what is that purpose? Question number three, since we are mortal, does our existence end at the moment of death? Or is there another life that awaits us, or another future that awaits us after death? These are three underlying questions. If we can answer them with valid, logical proof, then we have established our core beliefs. Now, how do we answer these three questions? What method do we take? There are three major methods of seeking knowledge. Knowledge can be sought through one of these three channels. And we have alluded to this in the previous lecture, but in this lecture I want to put more emphasis and more highlight and explanation of these three methods. I want your attention with me here to understand these three methods and to see which of these methods will be the starting point for us. We have three gates. Which gate are we going to enter from to answer these questions? The first of these methods is known as the empirical approach or empirical method, al-manhaj al-hissi, which is basically acquiring knowledge through sensual perception. Acquiring knowledge through sensual perception, our five senses. Meaning we acquire knowledge through seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. Through these senses, we acquire certain information. The second method is the authoritative method, al-manhaj al-ta'abbudi, which means acquiring knowledge from individuals that we trust and that we have no doubt tell us facts. Everything they say is a fact. This is called the authoritative method. The third method is the rational method, which is al-manhaj al-aqli, acquiring knowledge through reasoning. And reasoning is the process of using existing knowledge to arrive at new knowledge. Using existing knowledge to arrive at new knowledge. Let me explain this a little bit better. But really, these types of discussions are not very simple. They require a lot of thinking. So for every bit of information, I would like your full attention so that we can come out with a good understanding of these discussions. So far we've said there are two truths that cannot be denied. Truth number one, we exist. Truth number two, we are mortal. And we said that these two truths have generated three fundamental questions that we want to answer. Question number one, what is the origin of our existence? Question number 2, what is the purpose of our existence, if there is a purpose? And question number 3, is there anything after death? Or is that the end of our life and our existence? How do we approach these questions? Where do we find the answers? There are 3 major methods. We said the first one is the empirical method, which is al-manhaj al-hassi, which is looking from knowledge that we receive through senses. The second one is at-ta'abbudi, authoritative, seeking knowledge from certain individuals who we have full trust that all they give us is true knowledge. And method number 3 is the manhaj al-aqli, the rational approach or the rational method. What does reasoning mean? When we say manhaj al-aqli, what does it mean to use our aql? And this is very important. These are fundamental bedrocks of knowledge that we will build on. Reasoning is based on organizing self-evident truths. Self-evident truths to arrive at truths that are not self-evident. Masakum Allah bil khair. Assalamu rahmatullah. So we have 2 types of knowledge that our mind comprehends or that our mind generates. Number 1, the self-evident information. Everyone's born with this very basic self-evident information that is known as axioms, badihiyat. For example, when we say that the whole is larger than its parts, the whole of anything is larger than its parts. Is this self-evident, or is that something that requires proof? It's self-evident, it's clear. When we say, for example, that half of 2 is 1, half of 2 is 1, is that something that we have to provide proof and evidence to substantiate? Or is that clear, self-evident knowledge? That is clear, self-evident knowledge. If we say, for example, that 2 things that are absolutely contradictory cannot be both true. For example, I cannot say that this book right here, right now in my hand, is a book. And at the same time I say this is a piece of cloth. It's either a book or a piece of cloth. Both cannot be true at the same time from all aspects. I can't say that I exist right here, right now, in this place, but at the same time, right here, right now, in this place, I also don't exist. One of them is true and one of them is false. This type of knowledge is known as self-evident knowledge, axioms. That which is clear, that which does not require any proof. We use this type of knowledge, we organize it in such a way to produce new knowledge, and that new knowledge is what's called theorems, nadariyat. This is the knowledge and information that requires reasoning, that requires evidence. Where do we get the evidence from? From the first type of knowledge, the axioms, the badihiyat, the self-evident truths. Now, self-evident truths will produce theorems. Theorems can produce more theorems, and this is how the rational knowledge accumulates and builds on itself. So which of these 3 methods do we take to answer the 3 underlying questions? Again, just to see if you guys remember. What are the 3 underlying questions that we're trying to answer? Number 1, what is the source and origin of our existence? Number 2, what is the purpose of our existence? Number 3, is life on earth or death after life on earth is the end of our existence, or is there another realm that awaits us? These are 3 underlying questions that we're trying to answer. By answering these 3 underlying questions, we have formed a belief system. But now, which approach or which method do we take in order to answer? We have 3 methods. The empirical, which is the sensual perception, relying on senses. We have the authoritative, ta'abbudi, which is relying on certain individuals who we believe are factual in everything they say. And number 3, using the rational method, al-manhaj al-aqli. Which one do we choose? Let's analyze each of these methods. The first one, which is the empirical method, is a good source, but it's very limited. It cannot answer these underlying questions. Because this method says, I can only tell you what I perceive from this sensual world. Because it's senses. I can tell you what I see. I see people. I see trees. I see sky. I see sun. I see moon. I see myself in the mirror. I sense myself. I know I exist. I can see my hands. I can touch my hands. I can smell. That's all I can tell you. But this is a very limited source of knowledge that cannot answer the questions that we are looking for. That is why when someone says, I cannot find God through experiments, or I can't find angels through experiments, I can't test the barzakh, the world after death, through experiment, we say to them, you have relied on the wrong source of knowledge to begin with. Because the sensual perception or the empirical knowledge does not have the capability to answer these questions. What example did we give in the previous lecture, if you can remember? We talked about 3 different devices: camera, telescope, microscope. And we said that if we wanted to see our surrounding, all we need to do is use a camera to capture our near surrounding. But there's no way we can use that same camera to capture or to see germs. Rather, we would need to use a microscope. But if we wanted to see something that is very distant, such as one of the planets, then we would need to use a telescope. Can we use these interchangeably? No. I can't use a telescope to look for germs, and I can't use a microscope to look for a planet that is far away. So when we come to this method, the empirical method, the method of sensual perception, we cannot expect it to give us more than that which it can sense, that which it can see, that which it can smell, that which it can hear. Let's move on to the second method and see if the second method can help us. The second method is the authoritative method, to rely on certain individuals who say that they are holy, they are sacred, and they have the full truth and the ultimate truth because they receive divine revelation. Can we rely on that method from the start? The answer is no. We cannot rely on that method. Meaning, if you bring me scripture, or if you bring me the Prophet himself, and he says, I have knowledge to give you. There's a God that exists. These are his qualities. There's a heaven, there's a hell, there's a way of life that you have to live. Do I accept that immediately from the start? The answer is no. I have to first establish the authenticity and credibility and reliability of that person before I can accept what they say is true. When they tell me, for example, that there is a God that exists, if they give me proof and this proof settles and rests in my mind as a valid proof, then my rational mind has accepted that there is indeed a God. Then we move on to the next level. So the correct way of resolving these questions is to begin with the rational approach or the rational method. So do we begin with the sensual or the empirical method by itself? No. Do we begin with the authoritative method? No. We begin with the rational method, but with the help of the empirical method. Because aql needs this sensual data, the information that it senses through the senses, to take them in, to digest them, and to reason through them. For example, when aql sees that there is stars, there is moon, there is sun, there's trees, there's humans, the senses are transferring all types of information to the mind. The mind is saying, this is very intricate. what you're delivering to me is very, very complex. And this complex creation that you're delivering to me through the senses must have a creator. Not just a creator, but an intelligent creator. You see how the mind is taking the information that the senses are capturing, and the mind is using the axioms, the basics. Everything that has been preceded with non-existence must have a cause. This is an axiom. This is a self-evident truth that is ingrained in the mind, that is built, or the mind is equipped with. Everyone shares that self-evident knowledge. It's not knowledge that you acquire. It's not knowledge that you learn. A child who's 2 years old, they're playing in the living room, and all of a sudden they hear a door knock. What do they do? What do they do? Right away, they churn. They give their attention to it. Why? Why do they do that? Because in their mind, it says that everything has a cause. And the question that their curiosity right away generated, what caused this knock? So you find that these are self-evident truths that every human being is equipped with. So which of these methods do we begin with to answer the three fundamental questions? The rational method. Of course, with the help of the empirical method, which means the help of the senses. Now that we have come to this conclusion, we're going to ask a question, and that is the first question that we want to resolve. And this question is going to take us several weeks to resolve. But this is just foundational principles that we're trying to establish. The question is, what is the origin of our existence? What is the origin of our existence? How do we answer this question based on the rational method, based on aql? Number one, the first possibility that comes to mind is we always existed. We don't need a cause for our existence. Now, when we analyze this, we find that this is absolutely false, because we know that we have not always existed. We know that we have a beginning. We were born one day, and our parents were born one day, and their parents were born one day. So the fact that we have always existed is what? It's not a fact. It's false. That's not true information. So we can't claim that we have always existed. Then we come to another possibility. We were caused by another existent. We were caused by another existent. But the question is that existent a cause that has always existed, or is it a cause that has been preceded by another cause that caused it? There are only two possibilities. That cause that caused us to exist is either something that is like us, it also has a beginning, it needs a cause to bring it into existence, or it is a cause that has always existed. Is there a third possibility? Rationally, think with me. Is there a third possibility? The cause that brought us into existence either is a cause that has always existed, or a cause that has a beginning and needs another cause to bring it into existence. If you tell me it is a cause that has always existed, then we have reached a good conclusion for the first stage. We have passed level 1. But if you say, no, I don't believe that this cause has always existed. So what do you believe? The cause is a cause that also has a beginning. Then I raise another question. What caused that cause? You say another cause, another existent. Okay, that existent that caused that cause, did it have a cause that did it always exist, or does it also need a cause? If you tell me that it has always existed, then we stop and we say, Alhamdulillah, we reached a good conclusion, then we move on to stage 2. If you say, no, we're still at stage 1. I still believe that that existent also has a cause. And then we ask you again about that cause, and we continue this chain that does not end. What does it mean when a chain is endless? Chain of causes that is endless. This is a little bit deep, but I rely on your understanding, inshallah. Just help me by focusing on this just for 30, 45 seconds with me, and inshallah we'll grasp it. Something either exists or it doesn't exist. Can something be inexistent at the same time that it's not an existent? No. It either exists or it doesn't exist. It's either wujud or adam, existence or non-existence. Are we clear on this? Point number 2. When you say there are infinite number of causes, and you're saying that all these causes have a beginning, which means that there has to be a cause that doesn't have a beginning for all these causes to come into existence. Because if you say that none of these causes has a beginning, and there's an infinite chain of causes, that equals you saying that there is no existence. Why is that? Because there's a foundational axiom in the mind that says that everything that has a beginning must have a cause. Nothing can come into existence without a cause. Pay attention to the wording, come into existence. You either always existed, then we don't ask you for a cause. But if you're someone that has been preceded with non-existence, then we say there must be a cause. So, is the cause that caused all these causes a self-existent, something that has always existed and doesn't need a cause to bring it into existence? Or is it a cause that needs another cause to bring it into existence? If we say it needs another cause, then we go back to the chain. And this chain will lead us to nothing. If we continue to say that all these causes are caused by a cause that also needs a cause and needs a cause and so on and so forth, that equals you saying that we don't exist today. Why? Because you've already established that if something comes into existence, it needs a cause. And you're saying this entire chain doesn't have a cause. Why? Because it's caused by causes that need a cause, and there's no end to this chain. Therefore, your aql, your mind, will tell you that you must conclude that there is a first cause that has never been preceded by non-existence. We call that cause wajib al-wujud, the self-existent, the self-sufficient cause, the existent that has never been preceded by non-existence, the existent that has always been there, the existent that does not have a beginning and does not have an end. And that is all that we are trying to prove at stage 1, is that there is a cause. Now, don't ask me what the name of that cause is. Is it God? Is it something else? That's something that we will have to examine in the next lectures. Because again, this is a foundational building. You're building block over block over block. We can't jump into saying this first cause is God. We have missed a couple of stages. We have to do this stage by stage, block over block. The first thing that we're trying to establish is that all this existence has to stop at a cause, and that cause has never been preceded with non-existence. If we stop at that point, then we have proved and substantiated the existence of a cause that is self-sufficient, that has not been preceded by non-existent. The self-existent, that which exists on its own, that which does not have a beginning. If we establish that, then we move on to another question. The question is, this eternal self-existent, is it intelligent? Is it an intelligent being? Is it a being that can reason? Or is it a being that can function with will and with knowledge and wisdom? Is it powerful? Or is it a being that is absolutely matter? Because some people from the atheists agree with us. They agree that there is an existent that has always been there, but they say that is matter. So the question is that self-existent, that first cause, is it just merely matter that continues to evolve? Or is it something that is beyond the confinements of matter. And that is what we will discuss next week, inshallah. How can we prove that this being that we have established to be the first cause is not matter, but rather something that is beyond the confinements of matter and beyond the limitations of matter, something that is intelligent? Because matter in and of itself is not an intelligent being. Matter in and of itself is not an intelligent being. And we're going to prove that the cause of all existence must be an intelligent being, a being that has power to choose to do or not to do. Matter doesn't have that choice. Matter follows certain laws that govern matter, and it evolves and changes according to these laws. It doesn't make a decision that today I will do this, today I will do that. No, matter is governed, but we're looking for that being that has no governance over it. And that is what we will discuss next week, inshallah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
Inshallah, it's time for the question and answer. Any question? Just raise the lady side. Any question?
There has to be a question because I don't think this was very clear, right? There are points that have not been, explained very clearly, I am sure. So there must be a question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah hajj.
Sayyid, what is the definition of aql?
Aql, ahsant. Aql has multiple usages in the Islamic literature. We're going to focus on the very common and basic usage of that term, and that is the power, the faculty by which a human can distinguish between right and wrong, a faculty by which a human can reason and generate knowledge, a faculty by which a human can understand their surroundings. It's basically a tool of understanding, of discerning, of making judgment. Basically, it's a tool of perception. It takes in information, it percepts it, and it makes judgments. It takes information, for example, the senses, just looking, I see there's water. I touch it, it's cold. I place it over the stove. I touch the stove, I move my hand because it's very hot. 2 minutes later, the water begins to boil. The senses, they're not giving me any conclusion. All they're doing is doing what? They're just telling me different information through the senses. I touch, it's hot. Mind receives, this is hot. I touch it before, it's cold. Mind says, cold water. I see it's boiling. Mind receives information, it's boiling. What does the mind do? The mind takes all that information, puts it together, organizes it, and deduces a fact. When water is placed on heat, it will boil. The senses did not conclude that. That's something that aql perceived and made that judgment. So aql is that machine, the mechanism that makes these judgments. It perceives, it understands, and it makes these judgments.
Ahsan. Now, is aql flawless?
Is aql flawless? Very good question. Aql has two levels. The level of axioms, which is what we talked about as the self-evident truths, such as 1 is half of 2, alaykum assalam. 2 is half of 4. Two things cannot both exist and non-exist at the same time, same place. These are what we call badihiyat. These are flawless. Unless someone has a deficiency, then of course the flawlessness comes from the deficiency in that person's mind and not in the deficiency of aql. But the theorems, the information that are generated from these axioms, yes, these are not flawless. These are subject to mistake. Hence why we find philosophers and humans through the course of history have always had different conclusions. And that is also a dalil, a proof that for someone to be the guardian of religion, they must be what? Flawless. Because we can't rely on someone whose mind is not flawless, because they could conclude and give us wrong information. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala definitely wants us to reach the right information. Therefore, He would not send people unless they have flawless mind in both their axioms and in their theorems. Ahsantum. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think I'm trying to get to the point that some of the divine issues are beyond the reach of aql. And we shouldn't use rational and aql to judge the divine issues. For example, based on my aql, which is the result of my experience and the result of which society I was grown up in, and the education that I had, it is impossible for a river to open up and Bani Israel pass through. My aql doesn't accept it.
So that's not impossible by aql. Aql doesn't say it's impossible. Aql says that's unusual, but not impossible. Because deep down, aql says if there is a power that can manipulate the chemistry of the river, it can change that river into brick.
As you said, if there is a hot surface, the aql says that my hand will burn.
Correct.
But if a prophet is thrown into fire and that fire becomes a garden or it becomes cool for him, my aql, if I just use my aql.
You're using the experimental aql. You're not using the full aql that is beyond just the empirical senses. Yani, let me say this in a different way. When we say aql, the very, very basic logic and rational principles of aql, aql does not find it impossible for the chemistry of fire to be manipulated if someone has the code to decode it. Yani, this fire has components, right? It's not absolute, it's a composition. And these components are what make it light and what make it burn and what make it give heat. Now, who created these components? Aql will tell us there is a creator. We'll get to that fact once we continue these lessons. We'll understand that there's a creator who is powerful and knowledgeable. This creator who created fire has full authority to manipulate the components of the fire. He can do a manipulation that changes it from fire into ice. And he can change it from fire into breeze. And he can change it from fire into anything that he wishes according to his power. Aql says all that is possible if you have a powerful being that has that control. But Aql says for me and you it's impossible. So Aql distinguishes between the two. Aql says it's impossible for me. That's why you mentioned my experiment, the experiment that I have from society, where I grew up. My limitations tell me that this is impossible for me or for a human. But if there's something beyond the level of human that can decode this fire and change it into something that is cool, then Aql doesn't mind. No, Aql says it's impossible when you say that this fire is fire, but at the same exact moment, exact place, it's also ice. That's where Aql says that's impossible. It's either ice or fire. But it's fire that has been converted to give cool effect. Aql doesn't say that's impossible as long as there's a powerful being that can manipulate its components. Ahsan Allah alaikum. Any other questions from the brothers, the sisters? Tfadal Abu Aliya. La bas. I'll try to translate after you. Yeah.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala خلق العقل وخاطبه.
أقبل وأدبر. نعم.
بعض العلماء يقولون هو العقل بس واحد، بس احنا عندنا قابلية التقبل الرسيف يعني وياه. الساتلايت والسيلفون. يقول احنا ما عندنا عقل وانما عندنا القابلية.
So this is one of the brother Hajj Abu Aliya has raised a good point. There is a view among some of the philosophers. They say that aql is only one. We don't have aql. but we have a receiver that receives from that aql. As if aql is that main channel that Allah has kept somewhere, and it's only one, and everyone receives from it based on their capacity. There's that theory. But to be honest, that theory is hard to prove 100%. Why? Because we have so much ahadith and so much ayat that emphasize the importance of ta'aqqul and how people are distinguished by how much aql they have. Now, if we're talking about just terminology, it's okay to say, okay, there's just one aql and we're receiving from it. But what we are receiving from it is what? Is ta'aqqul. So we have some level of ta'aqqul. In the end, all we have to agree is that we have a faculty within us, a power within us that allows us to think, that allows us to reflect, that allows us to perceive, that allows us to make judgments. That's all that we have to conclude. يعني بعبارة مختصرة باللغة العربية النتيجة هي واحدة، سواء كان العقل شيء واحد ونحن نأخذ منه كل بحسبه، أو كنا لكل منا عقل ونستفيد من النتيجة واحدة، وهي القوة التي من خلالها نميز بين الأشياء ونحكم على الأشياء وننتج معلومات جديدة من خلالها. أحسنتم. Any other questions from the sister side? Yes, brother Kadham, please. And then we have questions from the back as well, inshallah, once brother Kadham is done.
Sayyid, how does wisdom come into this? And is wisdom received or been given through a source, or is it developed through the other senses?
Through the aql or the senses. Very good. So there are different ranks of wisdom. There are different ranks of wisdom. There is a very high quality, special, divine wisdom. This is given. وَمَنْ أُوتِيَ الْحِكْمَةِ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. One who has been granted wisdom has been granted a lot of good. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةِ. We have given Luqman al-Hikmah. This is a special bounty and a blessing, a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then we have the lower ranks of hikmah, which is based on correctly using our aql and making better benefit and use of the experiences that we have in life. So for example, somebody who has been married for 20 years, they have a lot of experience. Now they have a good understanding of how marriage has ups and downs, and they can make better decisions. We call that hikmah. They have developed hikmah from what? From this very long experience. They've been dealing with people for a long time, so now they have developed a good skill, a way to manage issues and manage conflicts. That is a level of hikmah. But is it divine hikmah? No. This is hikmah that is received through tajrubah, through experiments or through experience, through khibra, through making good use of the intellect that we have. So yes, hikmah can be produced by aql, but also hikmah can be received from the divine revelations. Ahsantum. Over there, I think Brother Muhammad or Brother Ali had a question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullah.
My question is that how do you distinguish and differentiate the first hypothesis, which is we have always existed, and the last one, which says there's an always existence, that the others take their existence from it? What's the difference, and how do you distinguish these
The
two?
difference is through our senses. We sense, our senses and our aql together conclude that we have a starting point. Right now, if I were to ask you, do you believe for certainty that you have a beginning? You say, of course. Today I'm 50 years old. 50 years ago or 51 years ago, I wasn't in this world, right? I wasn't here 51 years ago. You know that for a fact. So that means you didn't exist. Where were you? Oh, I was in my mother's womb. How long were you there for? Oh, 9 months, give or take. 50 years before then, where was your mother? Oh, she wasn't in existence. So when you go back in this chain, you conclude through your aql that there's no way that me, my father, my great-grandfather, all the humans that have lived before us have always existed. There must have been a beginning point. And this is what makes us conclude that there is a beginning point. In fact, even science tells us that matter has to have a beginning point. Because, tell me why does matter have to have a beginning? Because all these scientists tell us that matter will expire one day. Keep this in your mind for 1 second. If matter will expire one day, if it is eternal, that means it should have been expired long time ago. Repeat. Matter is eternal. If something is eternal, it means it has been there for how long? Billions and billions and billions and beyond billions. So that means if it has an expiration date, it should have been expired a long time ago. When you say something is eternal and it still exists today, knowing that it continues to evolve and it has an expiration date. When you say that matter has to have an expiration date, agreed. So that means it has a beginning. Because if it has been always there, that means that expiration date must have been finished a long time ago. Otherwise, you'd say, well, this universe could live for 50 billion years. Okay, so 50 billion years ago, this universe started. If you say, no, it's eternal, it's more than 50 billion, then it should have been collapsed years ago. But if you say, no, it has a starting point and it will expire one day, we say, good, we agree. Before the starting point, what was there? Or what caused that universe to come into existence? This is what we will try to discuss, inshallah, in the future discussions. We have 2 minutes left, or 3, for the questions before we get into salah. Sisters, questions on the sister side? Okay, brother's side? I know it's a heavy topic, but we have to ask to grasp it. Your body's not clean? No. Only the parts of wudu need to be pure before you can do wudu. Yeah, only the parts of wudu. Your face, but your clothes, your legs, your other parts of the body, if they're not clean, yani they're contaminated with najasa, that doesn't matter. Your wudu is still valid. But for you to do salah, you need to clean and ahsant. Like if you want to read Quran, for example, you just want to be in the state of wudu, but you happen to have clothes that are najis or body that is mutanajis, there's no problem in that. As long as you don't have a hadath akbar which requires ghusl, that's a different story. Ahsantum wa antum. Ahsant. Thank you for the question. Yes, sisters, brothers, any more questions we have on either side? Okay. Going once, going twice, going thrice. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.